Recording's in progress. Robin, over to you for a quick intro.
Right, thanks everyone for joining. The origins of this seminar was a question by Greg, club coach, chief coach, as to what coaching topics Red Ribbons might be interested in receiving some guidance on. And on Telegram, we put that question and had a number of suggestions, which I've put together in an agenda, which was circulated on Telegram. We're going to take those in order. I did also publicise this on the coaches group. I don't think we've got any other coaches present apart from myself and John, and also on the club coaching Telegram group, not the Red Ribbon one. Let's kick off and run through the questions. And by far and away, the most popular one was the topic of collision avoidance on a busy ridge. Andrew Lee, I know you were one of the main people asking about this, and you and I had some discussion, but it was also raised by Arthur Campbell, by James Parker, and by Dominic Brown. Now, I think the question was not so much what does air law say, but how do we apply this in practice? And the discussion you and I had, Andrew, was in relation to flying on a busy ridge, perhaps on a right-hand beat, and approaching the end of that beat, wanting to turn away from the ridge to the left, and finding there was another glider outside you, just behind you, not overtaking and not wanting to pull out in the path of that other glider. Is that a fair summary of your main concern, Andrew?
Yes, that was the scenario that most occurred to me, but it was that also in the general, how do we calibrate to know what other people are going to do, and therefore to be able to avoid them. It's, you know, so how do we apply the rules and make them work?
Okay.
And there were a couple of other related points, Johnny, raised by Johnny Carr in relation to being aware of hang glider presence.
Yep. And
by Catherine Castle in terms of when you're ridge soaring and other people are thermaling above the ridge, how do you deal with that scenario? Perhaps I can throw it back to you then.
Yeah, sure. Okay. So, well, the first thing I would say is we're obviously not going to try and, it's impossible to cover everything. And a lot of this will come from experience. So what we're going to try and do is give you some of our experience and things to look out for. So first of all, what I would say is this: we're coming out of winter and we're moving into spring. So for those of you who've been flying over winter, mainly what you've been experiencing are ridge soaring conditions, because there's not a lot of thermic activity. And when you've just got everybody ridge soaring, it's easier to maintain air law, it's easier to maintain collision avoidance because people set up a pattern and they follow it. And it's kind of easy to see what that pattern is. So we're kind of looking at a situation where it's not easy to see the pattern. It's not entirely obvious what the other pilots are doing. And how do you deal with that? Because it's going to happen. What you're basically going to find certainly from next time we fly, which will probably won't be for another couple of weeks looking at the weather, but we're going to be into thermic conditions, which means that you're now going to have a situation where you're going to find pilots, they'll start to ridge soar, and those pilots looking at moving away from the hill will find partway along the ridge some lift. And what you're going to notice happening is people suddenly peeling off halfway along a beat and pushing away from the hill. So you're going to have, and if you're not familiar with that, it looks very confusing because you're expecting this pattern of people up and down the ridge, and you're now going to get pilots suddenly turning away from it and flying out. So this adds a degree of randomity to what's going on. So I guess the question is, how do you deal with it? I think I'm looking at some of the notes that Robin's got on here. Okay, he's mentioned effective observation. So I think one of the key things is, which I stress all the time to most pilots anyway, is before you launch, before you get anywhere near like taking off, first of all, make sure that you've handled everything about your wing, your setup, your kit, so you've got zero attention on it. You know, you've got to have all your attention on what's going on around you, not what's happening. You know, did I do my harness up? Is my reserve falling out? Have I got a twisted line? You can't be dealing with any of that in a busy sky, because you're not looking at what's happening. You're not looking at the other pilots. You're worried about what's going on with your wing. So first of all, I would say is A, double check everything before you launch. It's really important. B, if you do take off and you think there's something wrong with your wing, there's something you're not sure of, land straight away. Don't even think about, oh, just land, sort it out, take off again. So that's just a basic. That's just to get your attention freed up to look at what's going on. So now what's going to happen is, so how busy something is not based on how many pilots are in the air, it's based on how much lift you have. If you've only got weak lift, so you can only get 40, 50 feet above the ridge, if you've got 5 pilots therming up and down, soaring along, it will be very busy. If there's a lot of lift and separation, you can have 100 pilots in the air and it actually won't be that busy. So the first thing is based on observation, is it's not how many people are flying, you're looking at what's the separation, how much lift are people getting, are they pushing away from the hill, are they stuck in a narrow band above the hill. If you see people stuck in a narrow band above the hill, it's probably best not to launch, because you're going to be putting yourself in a situation where you have little room for maneuver and your risk of collision goes up. So that would be my first point on that. The other point is, this is always a tricky one. You know, make sure you do know your air law. Make sure you've totally got it. When you take off, you know which is your left side, you know which is your right side. It sounds silly, but it just sort it out for yourself. Again, before you launch, take a look and think, right, so if I'm going in this direction, I have the ridge on my left, I need to be away from the ridge. I need to give way to people coming towards me. Vice versa, if I'm going the other way and the ridge is on my right, okay, that's that direction. I technically have right of way. Now, bear in mind, it's a technical point. You know, at the end of the day, the primary rule is do not collide with someone. You know, there's no point being in the right because you were in the right and flying into somebody. That doesn't do anybody any good. So it's you have a responsibility to not collide with someone, regardless of what's happening with the other person, regardless of how they're flying, regardless of what they're doing. You do need to avoid them. And most of that comes from prediction. And as Robin has said in his notes, it's effective observation. So you need to look at, well, what is effective observation? And it's to do with how far away from someone do you actually need to start planning what you're going to do. So let's just take a little look at that. If you've got the average wing has a trim speed probably about about 30 kilometers an hour. You're probably not flying much slower than that, I would have thought. So if you've got 2 wings approaching at 30 kilometers an hour, regardless of whatever else is going on, you've got a 60 kilometer an hour approach speed. And if you break that down, whatever that is, it's, what's that, 10 meters a second or something, or no, I don't know the math, but if you think how much time, you don't have, once someone gets within 50 meters of you, you're very close if you're flying towards one another.
Can I come on this, John, just to make a couple of comments?
Yeah.
There was some research done in the US, which was in the context, I think, of general aviation and light aircraft. And there were 2 points that struck me from that. The first is that people tend to look at an object in their sort of intermediate vision distance, about 30 feet away. If you think about driving a car, most of the time you're looking at the rear number plate of the car in front, unless you're actively observing what's happening around. And the second point was that from observing another aircraft, it generally takes a pilot 12 seconds to recognize it, realize what it is, respond to it, input the controls, and take avoiding action. And I think a light aircraft in that time covers something like 1 kilometer. It's going to be less for a paraglider, but as you were saying, it's still significant.
Yeah, it's 60 kilometers. So I was just trying to mentally do the maths as you were talking on that. So it's like, the thing is, you kind of need to, as Robin says, you need to be taking in, continue looking at wing, wing, wing. It's easy to fixate on like the wing in front of you. And you need to start learning to, or not learning, doing. You basically need to start forcing yourself to look at the pattern of wings that are flying. Okay, there's that one, there's that person in front, there's that person to the side. You have a quick look, I've got that person there, I've got someone behind me. So you've got a picture of what's going on around you so that you're in a situation where you can decide, okay, if I have to turn out, am I flying into somebody? Is it safe to turn? Oops, sorry, a couple of people arrived, I haven't let in yet. Staying 2 more people in. And it's, I think as Ron was saying, basically you have to plan probably more ahead than you think you need to plan. It's, yeah, the time, if I'm flying and I see someone coming towards me and I can kind of see they're on the same sort of line and they're like 100, 200 meters away, I'm already thinking, okay, what am I going to do? What's, I start looking around, what are my options? And if I'm technically in the right, because I've got the hill on my right, one of my options would be, I may have to land. If this person doesn't move out the way, doesn't give me a space, I'm actually going to consider just going and landing as an option. My other option would be, which I shouldn't do, but I may have to actually do something I really shouldn't do, which is go left and fly out away from the hill to get around this person. And that's quite a risky maneuver because you need to really know what's happening behind you, what are the pilots, what's going on with other pilots, what are the effects of it. You pulling out means someone else behind you now has to turn. You get this like ricochet effect where this nice even pattern suddenly goes to crap. And everyone's now flying all over the place and it becomes really random. So I would say the effective observation thing that Roy mentioned is key. And it's based on timing. It's based on making yourself look at what's happening with other wings and kind of building up a picture of how they're flying. What's your prediction? Like in 5 seconds, where will they be? How are they moving? And then you can adjust accordingly to work around it. And I think it's probably a testament to the fact that most pilots do it based on the fact we have very few mid-air collisions. I mean, given the amount of hours we fly, the proximity we fly, it's not often it happens. There are an awful lot more mid-air avoidances that go on because people have flown randomly, and you do need to be prepared on a busy sky to take whatever evasive action you need to take to avoid flying into someone, and it can be suddenly having to put a lot of input on one side to turn away from someone because they're just not getting out of the way and you've left it a bit too late. Or you think oh, they're definitely going to turn, and they don't. The other thing would be, is Roy mentioned, is like signal your intentions to other pilots. Like for yourselves, don't be unpredictable. Don't sort of like look like you're going in this direction, then turn the other way. I mean, you don't have to put a hand signal out and go, no, I'm turning this way. But you can sometimes see it just by looking at someone's body motion. Okay, they're starting to turn in this direction. Great. Don't do that. Don't start to turn direction and go, no, I'm going to now turn and go the other way. Because other pilots will be watching you. They'll be watching how you're flying, and they'll see you start, they'll expect you to complete that turn. If you suddenly randomly change your mind, it throws things into complete disarray. So you need to observe what's going on. You're always, when it's a busy sky, you're continually planning your flight path. It's a continuous process. You really don't get any break from that. It's, you know, until you're away from a lot of the other pilots, you actually can't relax at all. It's like you're continually observing, you're continually planning, calculating what's going on. I've got this person there, I need to go, right, okay, brake, slow down. And it's, you know, that I would say that's really important. You don't think there's some point here where you can switch off. You cannot. Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of the basic thing. There are a couple of key things though that will come up. The tricky point is if we just think of Devil's Dyke, northwesterly wind, you've got the takeoff, you take off, you head west. As you're going down that way, you've got the ridge on your left, so you should be giving way, you should be pushed out a bit to allow other pilots to come back. The problem comes when you get to the end. You've got to do a loop through the traffic, because we never make a turn into the hill. We just don't do that. We always turn away from the hill. So now you're basically on the left-hand side of the traffic. You're coming to the end. You're going to make a turn away from the hill, and then you've got to come back across that line of traffic to get so that it's on the right side. I'm going to see if I can share this. I'm going to see if I can do a quick screenshot. Put a little Robin's on the picture. I just put one up of the dike just to illustrate this. You can give me 2 secs. I'm going to share this picture. Hopefully you'll see it. If I share that and share it. Okay, so it's that. Can you all now see this sort of image of the Devil's Dyke on? Yeah,
that's up.
Got it?
Yes.
Great. So I thought just to illustrate the point. So here's a typical place to take off. And if we follow the blue line down, we can see we're flying towards the bowl. And now we get this loop thing at the end, where you can see we get to the end, and we've got to do this crossover where you're generally going to do that, fly a bit towards into around towards the pylons, turn, come back, and now you've got to cross through traffic to get back to have the ridge on your right. And there is no escaping that. There's no easy way around that. So that's where you really have to have all your timing. You've got to be watching what's going on. You've got to have reasonable prediction of what's happening to the pilots. And realistically, you're going to have to dodge a few people at this point to make it happen. It isn't going to be super smooth. There is no easy fix for this. You are going to have to fly through a bunch of pilots to get to the other side. And you just have to work on your timing and understanding and build up on it. You know, like try and fly initially when there's only a few people in the air, and then as it builds up, you'll get more used to it. And you'll learn how to speed up, slow down your wing, adjust it so you can make that turn. And the interesting is if you look at the path of that, you go back towards takeoff, you've got a ridge on your right. The turn at the other end is straightforward because you're turning away from the ridge and you're automatically on the outside of it. So that end of the ridge, not a problem. It's just this one, it's just in the bowl it becomes an issue. And it becomes a bigger issue, particularly at Devil's Dyke. I'll just stick with this boat. Because of the shape of that bowl, there is a V shape. There is a bit of venturi that can occur there. The wind often picks up through that point. So it can be a slightly tricky spot. The plus on it is the wind is often accelerating through that. So you will normally find you'll get some lift as you go around that bit. I'm just going to stop sharing it for a moment. So, oops, so The key thing to also sort of get used to is if you're starting to fly with a vario, and you know, as you fly into the bowl, you'll get a bit where you get a bit more lift. Use the lift to make your turn. Actually makes the turn easier and quicker to do. And it gives you a little bit of extra height. You're not quite so panicked about where you're going. You can make your turn and fly back along the ridge again. Does that kind of make sense? I'm trying to go back to Ron's notes on this. The other thing Ron mentions here, which is important to look at, two other things. And one, we're currently assuming that everybody's flying at the same level, which won't be the case. You're going to get pilots at different levels. You're going to get people higher than you, depending on how high you are, lower than you. And one of the points Robin makes is don't fly directly above or below another pilot. Why do we say that? Because it's not uncommon that the way the air flows, that, you know, if there's lift, next to lift, there's sink. So if someone's coming through and coming up through a lifty bit and you're approaching them, the odds are you'll hit that little bit of sink just before you get there. So it's not uncommon to have this situation where you're above someone's below you, and you're approaching. As you approach, they hit the lift just as you hit the sink, and you suddenly find you're actually heading towards one another, where you before you thought, I've got loads of space, it's not a problem, I'll just fly over them. And suddenly it's like, oh crap. And even if you're not, you know, all it takes is your feet, that you got this much height, and it comes down to your feet are now approaching the top of their wing. You don't want that to happen. So, you know, avoid doing that unless you've got tons of height. You know, if you've got, I mean, to be safe, you probably want, if you imagine from the bottom of your harness to the top of your wing and double it at least, you want at least that much separation before you fly over somebody, minimally, because it will happen. You know, especially we're coming out of winter, we're coming into thermic conditions. You're going to find a pilot hitting some lift and going up very fast, you hitting sink and coming down fast, and your positions can change rapidly. And if you're not used to it, you will get caught out with that, where you'll suddenly drop. You'll be flying along, and then a second later, you'll be 50 feet lower than you were. And the other pilot's going to be 30 or 40 feet higher. And it's very risky stuff. So, you know, keep that, you know, if you are above someone, don't assume that they're staying that below you. Treat it as if they're flying towards you, give them space on either side, and you'll be fine. So the other thing on this as well is, okay, so what else do you have to watch out for? You're soaring, you've launched, you're going up and down. You now have to watch out for other pilots launching. And because how are you going to launch? You're going to launch basically directly away from the hill, and you're going to somehow have to get into this traffic flow. And as much as it would be great if everybody looked out and nobody ever flew into anybody else and nobody ever flew in anyone's path, realistically, that's not what occurs. You know, so you have to be watching all the time, not just the pilots in front. You've now got to watch the pilots on the takeoff and scattered along the hill to see who's about to launch. You know, did they just pull the wing up? Do they look like they're about to run? Are they getting ready to take off? And you know, you kind of got to predict flight paths and think, okay, so I now need to turn, I need to allow for that, I need to get out of the way. So there's a lot, you kind of getting the idea, you need to be, as long as you're close to the ridge, there's a lot going on in your head, basically. You're continually thinking, computing and working on things. It's one of the reasons that, which we'll cover, I guess, shortly, it's important to try and get away from the hill as early and as soon as you can. It's much nicer. You know, if you can push away from the hill, if you can get some height, if you can get out of this up and down soaring, it's much more enjoyable. You're away from people, it's easier. We'll get onto that. So separation of the gliders. And then hang gliders. Let's take that up as well. So what the main thing you have to watch out for on hang gliders is they're going to be flying a lot faster than you are. So whatever your prediction on collision rate, everything else is for the paraglider, you've now got to take into, you've got to watch hang gliders, watch how fast they go, watch how they turn, you know, watch the circles they make when they turn, and factor that into your flying as well. So does that, I don't want to put everyone off flying, but you do, you know, one of the things is I cannot stress enough that you have to be as switched on as possible. Your attention is on everything that's going on around you. You're watching people all the time. And I would also include in that as well, you know, things like when you're flying in that traffic, do not be messing with your instruments. Do not be trying to sort your camera out. You know, anything to do with that at all, just forget it. If your camera's not on, leave it turned off. If your instruments aren't quite working properly, ignore them. You know, just concentrate what's going on around you. If you want to fix them, land, sort them out, take off again. You know, do not try and do anything in busy traffic. You will lose track of what's happening, and you'll be amazed how rapidly you're suddenly on a collision course with someone, or you're off the flight path, or you know, you think you've been distracted for 2 seconds and you're suddenly causing all sorts of chaos in the air. So anything like that, just land, sort it out, take off again. I mean, that is such key advice. I cannot stress it enough. So just any questions on that section before we go on to something else? Just quickly.
A couple of comments, John.
Yeah.
One, if you're flying on the hill and you think it's too busy, remember that you're part of the problem and can be part of the solution. In other words, don't blame everyone else for making it a busy flying site when you're flying there as well. So do be prepared to land if it's too busy. The second point, I think, going back to your diagram of Devil's Dyke.
Do you want to bring it up again?
Not necessarily,
okay.
No. Those principles apply to all of our ridge soaring sites. There comes a point at the end of the ridge, it's not always a bowl, but you turn and come back. I posted on Telegram a few weeks ago when we first started asking these questions, one of Greg's fly bubble videos, when he's talking about this subject, and he's talking about effectively traffic lanes. And it is the case that at some of our sites where people don't, on a beat to the left, then turn out and come back to the inside, we actually end up with 3, 4, sometimes more lanes, different distances out from the ridge of people going up and down. And that makes it infinitely more complex to avoid what everyone else is doing and anticipate what they're going to do. So do try and be disciplined and fly on the inside with the ridge to your right and on the outside with the ridge to your left.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a bit like, you know, if you're driving down the motorway and there's someone who just hogs the outside lane, you don't have to hog the outside lane. You can actually do what you're supposed to do and switch lanes correctly. And it's the same with flying. Don't, because a couple of people are being twats or not flying properly, don't follow that principle. You know, do what's correct. The more people we have doing what's correct, the better it becomes. Okay, and there was one other point on this, which you mentioned at the beginning, Rob, as well, is to do with thermals. This is an interesting one, and probably some of the more experienced pilots may well disagree with what I'm about to say. Basically, if there are pilots ridge soaring, and if you are a thermaling pilot returning to the ridge, then you have to remember that if you're at ridge height with pilots in it, your regardless of what you were doing, you're now entering that ridge soaring pattern. And you can't really expect everybody to allow for you to thermal close to the ridge just so you can thermal close to the ridge and give up their ridge soaring pattern. And it's kind of, the onus is really on the person thermaling to make allowance for those people ridge soaring rather than the other way around. Now, obviously, you can't go, well, I'm not going to get out of the way because I was told that I'm ridge soaring, I'm correct. But if you're one of the people who's starting to thermal, try and get some height, push away from the hill, get to a point where you can complete your turn without colliding with the ridge traffic. If you can't and you're coming back into ridge traffic, then you're in ridge traffic. I'm sorry, you've got to follow the rules of the ridge at that point, and make allowance for the other guys who are soaring up and down. And I have had this argument with other pilots before. I said, sorry, my view is if you're thermaling, you're actually probably in a better position to see what's going on. You need to make allowance for the guys ridge soaring. It's not the other way around. Otherwise, you just get complete chaos on the ridge soaring line. I don't know what I don't know what your views on that, Robin, but that's my.
Yeah, my only comment is obviously it depends on the height. If you're down at ridge height or below, you don't want to be turning into the ridge as a thermaling pilot anyway. So no. In this situation, you're well above ridge height. Should we move on to the second question and see how many you can go through, John? I don't think, have we got James Parker on the line?
I haven't seen him in the list.
No, I didn't see him. Well, the question from James is, when was the best time to launch? I'm not quite sure what he had in mind, but I did have some thoughts. There's a James to everyone saying higher.
Right.
James, do you want to unmute yourself and just explain a little bit about your question, if that James is James Parker?
That is this James Parker, yes. Hi, how you doing?
Hi, James.
Good to see you all.
Do you want to clarify your question?
Yeah, it was really just about timing, really, especially on somewhere like Devil's Dyke, where it's particularly hectic and you've got quite often 2 or 3 lanes of traffic. Sometimes maybe, as I said, this probably just comes from experience, but it's and hard to describe in this format probably, but it's about when to kind of take the plunge. I sort of find myself a bit stalled sometimes when there's people are sort of they're coming back in on a beat and top landing, other people are 2 or 3 lanes of traffic going past you. Figuring out the timing to slot yourself into that pattern I just find a bit tricky sometimes, but again, probably better demonstrated on a hill.
No, we can take up some points on that. It's not just Devil's Dyke. We have exceptionally busy sites with limited takeoffs. Devil's Dyke, and they all have their different things. So if we look at Devil's Dyke, Bo Peak, Cavan, High Nova, they've all got their oddities about how you launch, when to launch. Robinson, I think it's bullet points. Step 1 is right mental state of mind. So first of all, make sure that you are actually prepared to fly. In other words, you've done your site assessment, you've looked at the conditions, and given that there was the space to fly, you would, and you feel comfortable in the air. So that's always key, is that you're happy with the site, you're happy with what's going on. Other than the fact it's busy, you would actually be flying. Again, as mentioned, make sure you're no attention on your wing, your pre-flight checks are done, you're happy with what's going on. Ideally, you've done a little bit of ground handling first. You brought the wing up, brought the wing down. You know that you can ground handle in these conditions. And then kind of looking at what's going on, have some sort of basic flight plan of what you want to do. So you're going to launch, then what? Are you going to go left? You're going to go right? You're going to push straight out? What are you going to do? And have that and sort of mentally, you know, sort of work, like think it through. Think, okay, I'm going to take off. I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to go east down the. I'm going to go, you know, either west down the slope, east down the slope. What am I going to do? And then stick with it. Work out, see what's happening, watch the pattern, fit, like mentally fit your flight pan into what's going on in the air, and run it through a few times. So you've actually kind of like mentally simulated what's going to happen. And then it'll start to fit in. It'll start to make sense. You'll start to see patterns in it, breaks. And then, yeah, sometimes you just have to wait a bit until there is enough break in the traffic and you're ready to go. And part of that being ready to go is making sure that you've done your pre-flight checks, you don't have knots in your wing, in your lines, that you are literally ready to go. You're ready to pull that wing up, run and launch. And part of what you can do to prepare for that without actually taking off is doing a few demos of that for yourself. Go to a part of the hill where you're not, you know, getting in trouble with anyone, and just see how fast you can just wing up, you know, take a few steps, bring the wing down, and just check that it's like that everything is in good order. You've had a quick look and you're ready to fly. Because if you're faffing around trying to get the wing up, that, you'll lose. You know, you might have a 5-second gap to actually launch. So you need to be prepared to launch in a 5-second gap.
Yeah, that sort of visualization of it is actually quite useful. Yeah, that's something to do for sure.
Yeah, so I think if you've got the visualization and you've done your bit, because you can always practice. You can always go to a slightly quiet spot, practice. You know, wing up, wing down, wing up, wing down, mushroom it, unmushroom it, wing up, wing down, and just make sure you're comfortable with that. And yeah, just checking everything's correct. You don't have tangled lines, you don't have twisted risers, just all the basic stuff. And I think if you've got that in place, the best time to launch will flow from having those setups in place. You'll feel more confident about being on the hill. You'll feel more confident about your launching. You'll be able to judge a gap and go, okay, yeah, I know I can get the wing up and launch in that time. Great, I can go. Yeah. And each hill you go to, reassess, because it'll be different. You know, launching from Caburn is very different from launching from the dike. It's different from launching from Bo Peep, where, you know, Bo Peep is probably one of our best sites, but you can have people taking off across the entire 100-meter stretch of hill to get over the fence. It's, you know, whereas Caburn, it's like there's a spot people on. It's, you know, it's easy to see what's going on. So each site's got its own anomalies, and you need to, I cannot stress enough, when you go to a site, take time, do a site assessment, look at the site, look at the conditions, look at what's happening, and do this visualization process of, okay, how am I going to launch? What's going to happen? Where am I going to go? And it'll start to become automatic, and it'll speed up, you'll launch faster, and your confidence about taking off will come up. And yeah, you'll just find it more straightforward.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions relating to that, or should we move on to the next one?
I think we're good.
The next one I've got, I don't think I've seen Rob Hadfield on the call. He asked, how can I predict the wind direction will change because of an incoming sea breeze?
Okay, so let's cover what sea breeze is. So we're a bit technical now. Sea breeze. So sea breeze is a phenomena where, let's just take let's take the dike or Bo Peep, because we're coming into sea breeze season, it's going to happen. So what's actually occurring is we're in a meteorological wind, we're in a northwesterly wind, it's blowing onto the hill. The sun's out, it's heating the ground. So it's basically cooking the ground in front of you. So that results in basically in rising air. Rising air results in low pressure. That rising air's got to go somewhere. It goes up, pushes out, goes out, drops over the sea. So you have descending air over the sea. So locally, we now have this system where we've got low pressure in front of launch, high pressure behind us forming over the sea. So your basics are air flows from high pressure to low. So this will start a sea breeze. It will start air flowing from the sea back towards the ridge. So just want to be clear that's the mechanics of a sea breeze. Now, what will happen is that the meteorological wind will start off being stronger than a sea breeze, so it will hold it back. It will, you'll be flying, but all the time, the sea breeze is building and building, and the strength of it is building, and the mechanics are it basically builds to a point where it suddenly actually gets stronger than the incoming meteo wind, and it overtakes it, and it just pushes over the back of the hill. So it's it's something that we have to be aware of from about now through to about September. Realistically, we get sea breeze effects, so why do we bother about it? Well, it's a sudden wind direction. You've gone from the wind on the hill to coming over the back. B, this is sea air. It's cold. It's colder air. It's not buoyant. The mixture tends to be turbulent. If you're in it, it's not good to be in it. You're going to get collapses. You're probably going to fall out of the sky. It's not a minor thing. So understanding it on our site is quite important. So first indication of it is a forecast, basically. Before you go out flying in the day, look at whatever forecast you're looking at, and you'll see roughly the time of day when the wind's going to switch. You'll look at whether you're looking at RASP or MET or Meteo Blue or whichever one you happen to be looking at, you will see that change in wind direction occurring. And that will be accurate probably to within about an hour or so. So you'll have an idea of when it's going to occur purely from the forecast. If at 12 o'clock it's a northwesterly wind and at 2 o'clock it's a southwesterly wind, somewhere in between that there's a sea breeze occurring that's blowing over the back of the hill. So that's your first kind of understanding that, okay, it's going to sea breeze today. It's going to occur roughly at this time. So I need to be aware of what's happening then. Now, one of the things I do advise is when you're actually on the hill is speak to other pilots about sea breeze and get them to actually point out to you the indicators of it. I'm going to kind of describe it, but it's better to see when you're actually there. Essentially, what you can actually see the sea breeze coming in with clouds. What you'll see are on the interface of the sort of the meteo wind and the sea breeze, you'll get this effect where you'll see these like tendrils of cloud dropping down, and they clearly mark the sea breeze front at that height. And now bear in mind, it is at that height. It's not telling you what's happening underneath it, but you'll see it drifting towards the hill. Sometimes you see it go all the way around, sometimes you see it coming straight towards you. And so you can watch that and see it approaching. And usually just before it completely kicks in, you'll get this little sort of tug of war going on over the hill between. It'll sort of start to sea breeze a little bit and the meteo will push back, and it'll breeze and the meteo will push back. So you'll observe that, and then you kind of, okay, it's coming, sea breeze is coming. I need to land now. I don't want to be in this. But don't rely on that. I mean, I've seen it at times where it just came through. It's like nothing, bang, 2 minutes later, it's sea breeze. You've seen people who are soaring suddenly flush down the front of the hill because instead of lift, they've now got backwind, sinking air behind them. They just literally slide down the hill. It's quite something to watch. The flip side is for more experienced pilots, they'll often look for the sea breeze because what you obviously get is you've got two air masses. So where they meet, you get convergence. So if your timing is very good and you're in the air and you're high enough, you can actually use that convergence to fly in. That we're not going to get into. Right now, our concern is that you don't want to be in it. The reason I mention it is you will see pilots sometimes launching just before the sea breeze comes in. So hopefully they're experienced, they know what they're doing. Do not copy them, do not follow them, do not take off because they've taken off. It's a very risky maneuver. Rob and I both know people who've had major accidents flying in that sea breeze front, and it's not pleasant. So do be aware of it. Do ask on the hill, and I think next time on the hill, grab myself, Robin, any of the more experienced pilots, and ask them about sea breeze, and they can tell you about it.
Before we move on to the next topic, there are 2 points. There is a corollary, which is the land breeze, but as pilots, we don't really encounter that because it occurs at night. And that's when the reverse happens and the wind blows from the land out to sea, following the same method and system. But when the air above the sea is warmer than the air above the land. The other thing is that the strength of sea breeze can be surprising. The sea breeze is not just a coastal phenomenon. Sea breeze can push 30 kilometers inland on certain days. So whilst all our sites are close to the coast and we experience sea breeze frequently, even on inland sites, they can experience sea breeze.
Well, you'll get that if you go to Wales. Go to South Wales and you're flying like Merthyr and places like that. I mean, they'll get the sea breeze blowing right the way in from, like you say, 30, 40 kilometers away.
Could I ask a question on that, John?
Yeah.
I mean, in our situation, sea breeze is coming in from the south. Okay, so if you've got a south-facing site, okay, so theoretically you've got the wind, but it's not a meteo wind, so it's coming in from the south. You can soar and all the rest of it. Now, that's the theory. Okay, but I understand that sea breeze doesn't work quite like that.
No, so the one site that really affects is Cavan.
For example,
Well, it's the main one, to be honest. So it's a good point. So Cavan, you're already flying in a southwesterly. So now what will happen is with the sea breeze, what you'll get is this acceleration of air that you're flying in. So you'll go from reasonably pleasant air, with summer, it's never that pleasant because it's going to be Berg anyway, to now accelerated air that will become rough, turbulent, tricky to fly in. You can expect to get collapses, all sorts of stuff. You may not even be able to launch. It may be too strong to launch. So it's very relevant on south-facing sites because you will get this sudden increase in wind. And it's quite often, it's usually more obvious that because what you'll tend to see is you've got cumulus above you and everything else. Sea breeze comes in, they all get blown 20 kilometers inland, and you now got blue sky above you and sea air blowing through. And usually if you sit at that point, you say, okay, take a break, have your lunch, wait out an hour. You will be flying in sea air, but it would have calmed down, and then you can get back to soaring again. It's just there's this.
So what I meant is clearly if you've got a southerly anyway, okay, and then you get the sea breeze, it's going to get much turbulence and all the things you described. Okay, what I'm saying is, say for example, it was a northerly, and at lunchtime, midday, the sea breeze comes in and takes over. So actually, you weren't ever on a northerly slope. You weren't going to fly there. You were going to go to southerly slope because it was going to happen. So it's changed from a northerly to a sea breeze. So the meteo is still a northerly, but actually you're still flying in a sea breeze.
Yeah.
Now, which theoretically, if you have any kind of basic logic, that would just be very nice. But actually, I don't think it probably is, because the sea breeze acts in a completely different way from meteo.
Yeah, that's
what I'm kind of asking.
Yeah, it's not unusual for pilots to actually do that. They'll on a day where it's like the sea breeze, you'll see guys flying Devil's Dyke in the morning, get to lunchtime, pack up, drive to Cavan, and try and aim to get there to sort of time it for when the sea breezes come through, then fly at Cavan later on. It's never that great. It is sea air. You will get some soaring. Expect it to be rough. Expect it to be turbulent, and you're probably okay. Don't expect it to be nice, smooth, soaring type air. But yes, that is the case. And as Robin says, especially on the coast, it's amazing how far inland that sea breeze pushes. And again, it's not quite relevant to you guys, but if you're planning cross countries, then it's something you take into account in terms of, well, okay, where's my route? I need to be this much inland, but I don't want to get into that right now.
Should we move on to the next one then?
Yeah,
John?
let's go on to the next one. Okay.
See how far we get. This one was from Robin Fitzgerald, who I think
He's on the, yeah, Robin.
he's on the call, which is fortunate because I don't think you've had much flying time since you qualified, Robin. How do I assess wind direction and speed when flying? Do you want to add anything to that?
Well, say you take off maybe, and you could see there could be a windsock out, and you go, "Oh, I know exactly where I am." You come into land, and you can see that basically. But what happens if all of a sudden you flew down towards the bottom for a bottom landing? There's no sock up there whatsoever, and you're thinking, well, which way is the wind blowing? How you don't necessarily see all the trees, especially when there's no leaves in the trees, not necessarily long grass. What do you use to try and assess wind direction?
Okay, it's a good point. At some point, you're going to leave the hill. Yeah, at some point, you're going to land nowhere near a windsock. And yeah, landing sort of into wind rather than downwind is fairly crucial. Obviously, the most common way to assess it while you're in the air is to turn. Is to do a fly a 360 and see, well, which way do you go fast, which way do you go slow? The fast route is downwind, the slow route is into wind, basically. Sounds a bit, I don't want to make it sound too simplistic, but it is the most common way of doing it, of assessing, assess your ground speed as you're flying. And that will give you a very good idea of wind direction. Bear in mind that, if you're not that far from the hill, the wind direction away from the hill is not going to be that significantly different than it was on top of the hill. There's a caveat.
One caveat to that.
I was about to say, there is a caveat to that, which is as the wind approaches the hill, if you're near the slope, that's a different matter, because obviously it's going to hit the slope and spread. And so, but I think we should look at slope landings completely separately, and we're going to assume, for the benefit of this, you're landing away from the hill, away from major obstacles, and you're assessing it based on your flight path.
I was thinking of a slightly different example.
Go ahead, Robin.
I was thinking about the landing field at Caban, and sometimes it can be on the top of the hill.
Yeah.
And the wind is coming from one direction, but actually, when you reach the landing field, you'll find it's coming from a different direction. And indeed, there may be no wind at all. The wind speed may be very different too, largely related to the topography of the ground.
Yes, it won't be that different though, to if you're able to do some turns above the Caban landing field. It doesn't change that much through a vertical distance of 400 feet above it. But yeah, you do have, I'll just take Robin's point, you do have to assess the wind direction above the point that you're at. And he says, like at Caban, don't assume that because on Caban it was a southwesterly, the landing field will be a southwesterly. It's not uncommon for it to be 90 degrees at variance to what it was on top of the hill. And that does catch pilots out. Even when we've got a windsock in there, they're kind of like, no, the windsock must be wrong. I know what direction the wind is. I'm going to land now. That happens. But no, it's something you have to practice. It's a skill you work on. And again, assess it as you're flying. Work it out, not because you got to land, just take it as a task while you're in the air and you're away from the hill. It's like, okay, well, which direction's the wind blowing? Which way is into wind? Which way is downwind?
What I would say, though, is when you're coming into land, very often there'll be other pilots who are about to come into land, and look at their approaches, look at the gliders on the ground, which direction they're pointing. Because there are clues there.
I think Robin's concerned he'll be the first person down, so he's the one who's got to make that decision.
I'm the one that's got a windsock, which
so you're the Robin, not you, Robin.
I usually leave it in the Caban landing field.
Yeah.
But I guess in fairness, it becomes more of a problem the faster the wind is with the landing, but you're probably going to notice that easier when you're doing your turning, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if the wind isn't so major, you might not notice it so easily, but then your landing won't necessarily be such a problem anyhow.
That's correct. Yeah. I mean, if there's almost no wind, it's like, well,
who cares which direction you're going?
but having said that, it's surprising. Even if there's a slight wind, the difference between downwind and into wind, you know, let's say the wind's only going at 5 or 6 kilometers an hour. The difference in direction is 12 kilometers an hour. You know, instead of landing into a headwind of 5k, you're landing with a downwind of 5k. You're running a lot faster.
Yep.
John, this might be a good time to slightly change the order of the agenda.
Sure.
And deal with the last question, which where I sent you a diagram dealing with crabbing into top land and the relationship between wind speed, air speed, and ground speed, because some of that's relevant to the question we've just had.
Yes. Okay.
Do you want me to see if I can share the screen of the note that I
do? It's one of those ones I'm inclined to deal with more on the hill, but we can go over it.
I've got host disabled participant screen.
I'll make you host.
Okay.
There you go. Yes. There you go. You should be yours now.
Right. Yeah. Share screen. That one.
So this is to do with.
Does that come up? Yeah, it has.
It did come up, and I lost it.
Oh.
You're now viewing. I'm viewing your screen. Apparently, it's fine for you. Can everybody see Robin's screen?
Yep.
Okay, good.
Yep. So you should be able to see a diagram with a triangle in it.
Yes.
I've got it anyway. Yes.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
It's there.
Okay, suspend reality for a moment and assume that you're flying this little orange glider in nil wind in a northwesterly direction. You're flying at trim speed, which in this case is 34 kilometers an hour. So your flight path is along this red arrow. There is no wind. So actually, in relation to the ground, you're still flying northwest at 34 kilometers per hour. Now let's introduce a wind, the green arrow, 24 kilometers per hour from the north-northwest. So suddenly, although you're still flying northwest through a body of air, that body of air in relation to the ground is moving along in the direction of that green arrow at 24 kilometers per hour. What this means is that the aggregate of those two vectors, your speed in relation to the ground and your direction in relation to the ground, is the third leg of that triangle, the blue arrow. So your ground speed, in this case, is 17 kilometers per hour, traveling west-northwest. I'll just pause at that point. Has everyone followed so far?
Yep.
Okay.
Why isn't your ground speed 10 kilometers an hour?
Because of the angle. It's the vector of it. It's not directly into it. It's at an angle. So you're taking that component in that direction.
All right. Okay. So you're adding it because you're not directly into the wind.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're going to come on to that. That's the little angle at the top here. The first point to bear in mind is that although you are effectively traveling kind of sideways, the glider is not flying sideways. The glider is flying in the direction of the red arrow. But because the air is moving, your direction of travel across the ground appears to be sideways. Now let's look at the top here and make a turn, a right turn. This angle at the top, which according to the app that I found that worked out what the actual angle was, is 28 degrees. If you turn 28 degrees into wind, for example, to land, at that point, your direction of travel is north-northwest. And at that point, your ground speed does become 34 minus 24, or 10 kilometers per hour. At this point, we're assuming that the pilot's still flying at trim speed. If he's coming into land, he can fly slower than that. He can fly all the way down to actually his stall speed. So I've assumed that the stall speed's about 20 kilometers per hour. So apply some brake, reduce your airspeed to 24 kilometers per hour. If you're flying at 24 kilometers per hour directly into a wind of 24 kilometers per hour, your ground speed becomes 0. Now, the question here, and I think Nicholas Loxton was one of those that asked, was how do I crab in to make a top landing and reduce my speed? And you can see from this that by following that direction of that blue arrow, then turning into wind in the direction of the green arrow and applying some brake, you can come in and make a very slow landing. You can vary the airspeed of the glider basically between, ignoring bar for the moment, between its trim speed when your hands are all the way up and stall speed when the glider stops flying. So if the wind speed is between those two parameters, you can effectively reduce your ground speed to 0. If, however, the wind speed is greater than the maximum speed of the glider, you're going to end up getting blown backwards. And one of the important things to bear in mind there is that if you're coming in to make a top landing, for example, at Bo Peep, when the wind comes up over the ridge, you have a Venturi effect. So the wind speed on the ground just in front of the barbed wire fence is probably higher than it is 60 feet up in the air. And we have had situations where pilots that were coming in to make a nice top landing, virtually nil ground speed, but as they descend into the Venturi, they suddenly find themselves getting blown back towards that barbed wire fence. Nicholas, does that answer your question at all?
Can I just a couple of things on that, Robin, I would say.
Yeah, John.
It's, again, a lot of this is practice, but you're not, take the diagram, but it's one of these things you've got to practice and practice and practice and practice and practice. And it comes back to what we were talking about before, which is the first part is you need to understand wind direction. So the underpin of this is when you're flying and you're thinking about landing, watch the landing area, watch the windsock, watch other pilots landing. Make sure you do know which direction the wind is blowing. Don't make any assumptions about it at all. Like, really observe, take a look, and then now look at what Robin's done and align yourself so you're going to end up flying into wind. And I wouldn't be worried too much about thinking what angle is this or what's how tight, how this. It's better to actually, as you fly in, you'll start to feel it with the wing. You'll get that sense of, by looking at the ground speed you've got when it's slowing down and when it's speeding up. You're going to be close to the ground. It's very obvious when you're grounded, when you're going fast across the ground and when you're going slow across the ground. The other thing I would say about this, about adjusting your speed, make sure you are 100% certain where your stall point is before you start pulling on a lot of brake. You do not want, this is I've seen this in a lot of newer pilots where they brake, they stall it much too high above landing. They can be like 10 feet above and they're almost stalling it 10 feet above the ground. That is a really bad idea. You want to come in with enough speed, and you want to be stalling when you're pretty much close enough to put your feet on the ground. So that's my only thing I would say on that, Robin, in terms of flying slowly, is be very careful about that when you're still 10, 15 feet or so above the ground. I've just seen too many pilots come in and stall the wing 10 feet above the ground because they've got to slow it down to land. And that's not really what you're trying to do. So that would be my thing to watch out for. That is, do not stall when you're going to drop to the ground. Be very wary of that.
Can I give you an example of what I was thinking about? Okay,
Sure.
I get what he's talking about. So just take Bo Peak, for example. Okay, say the wind is coming in, so your interwind beat is towards high and over, for example. Okay, so we're coming back towards high and over from the quarry end. Yeah.
Yep.
All right.
So basically on a northeasterly northeast.
So that's the direction we want to land, because that's basically the more interwind than the other. All right. Okay. So we've done our turn at the end. We've crossed over the line, and we're now above the field, and we want to land. Now, if you just go straight down and don't turn at all, okay, so you're flying directly towards high and over, you're just going to be going too fast. So at some point you need to actually turn into the wind. So you're going to turn left. Okay, so you're going to turn, and then you're going to try and land. So you're above the big field. Okay, so you're going to turn away from. You're going to turn north basically and try and land. So what I was trying to work out is instead of just flying straight down, do you try and crab beforehand so that you're on a half turn before you do your full turn and land into the wind?
Okay.
Do you understand what I mean?
I understand what you mean. So first of all, there is no fixed answer, because the wind changes, especially at Bo Peak. It can be anything from a north to a northeast.
Understand.
So you need to assess wind direction and wind speed. That's always crucial. You kind of want to be, let's say essentially it's northeast. The wind is coming from the high and over direction, so you're going to be landing, not from high and over, from Alfriston. You're going to be landing. You basically be landing going east, not going west, essentially. So you want to be losing your height to the westerly side of Bo Peak. So that then your final approach will just be you'll just be coming into land, into wind. You're not trying to set up above takeoff. You're going to be much further, like 100 meters along the ridge towards the west if your landing set up.
Yeah, I'm thinking the wind would be more northerly there, so it's coming onto the hill rather than from high and over. Okay?
If you take this diagram example, if you can remember it, and think of yourselves as flying along the blue arrow towards Alfriston. You don't need to apply any brake.
No.
But at some point, when you've got enough space in front of you, merely by turning the glider, even if not completely into wind, partly into wind, you're still going to reduce your ground speed.
Yeah, so on your blue line, you're actually effectively crabbing. You're not flying straight, are you?
The blue line is the crab.
Yeah.
The point I was trying to make here is that crabbing is not flying sideways. Crabbing is flying into the air, but when you combine your flying into the air with that mass of air itself moving in relation to the ground, the glider appears to be traveling sideways across the ground. It's not going sideways, it's going straight.
So the crabbing is going to happen automatically.
Yeah, the crabbing is the byproduct.
Right. Okay, I've got it. So it's not a choice. You don't choose to crab and then turn into the wind for your final flare. You're crabbing anyway, because that's
you're crabbing. But if you turn completely into wind, you will stop crabbing.
Yeah. Okay, I've got it. So the crabbing happens. It's not a choice. It happens anyway.
Yeah,
I've got you. Okay.
I think on this point, next time we're on the hill, we'll watch some people landing, and it'll become really. This is kind of where we need to be on the hill watching people, and you'll see it happening.
Yeah. Okay, I've got it. It's a question of not being a choice. It happens anyway.
Yeah. Cool.
Do you want to take control back of the screen, John?
Just unshare yours, Robin. It's fine.
I'm not sure how to do that, to be honest.
Sorry, can I have a question maybe about this crabbing thing?
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, just maybe I don't understand it 100%. So
just before that, so Robert, so when you shared it, there should be an option to stop sharing.
I've got it. Yeah.
Yeah.
There was a question coming in. Should we just take that first, though?
Yeah.
So just a quick one. So crabbing for me, when I've got one weight shift and playing with adjusting my crabbing with the other brake, or crabbing you're talking about drifted by the wind because it's sidewind.
And
I would say that crabbing is a byproduct of the wind. If you're applying weight shift or brake, you're actually turning.
Yeah, so I've got, for example, right weight shift, and with left brake, I can. Is it not something you guys do?
you're still you're still flying direct. You're still. It's this apparency.
I'm not sure about right weight shift and left brake.
All right, whatever. I'll show you on the hill what I'm talking about. I can't describe by words.
I wouldn't get, look, don't get too sucked into definitions and like, principles like that. It's better to be on the hill. You can watch something happening and go, oh, okay, that's what's going on. So let's not get into a discussion about what crabbing is and what crabbing isn't. We were looking at landing approaches basically, and what happens on a landing approach. Let's not get sidetracked into what is or isn't a crabbing motion of the wing.
Yeah, sorry, not is or isn't. Just I wasn't sure what you meant about it. But yeah, okay.
Yeah,
thank you.
Great. But we're happy to go over it on the hill though. Totally happy.
We're at 9:15, John. Have we got a sort of closing time planned? We've had one paddler that have had to leave.
I'm good for whatever. It's more. I don't want to get to the point where people are just like, too much data.
Let's press on then, and return to young Cher-Ho. Blake, your question was, how can I stay up longer when soaring? I think that's something that everyone would like an answer to.
Okay. Yes, when you first start flying, there's nothing more annoying that you land in the bottom landing field, look up, and you see everybody else still soaring. Very common. Happens to all new pilots. Happened to me. I'm sure it happened to Robin. It's like you go through this phase of, why are they still in the air and I am down here on the ground? Obviously, if it's a day where it's booming lift everywhere, you're going to go up. Everything's going to go up. So let's not look at that. We're looking at situations where it's kind of marginal lift. There's a little bit of lift. It's not blindingly obvious. And really, the major thing is learning to work with the vario. As much as you might want to fly by the seat of your pants, when you've got weak lift, you really, really do have to work with your vario. So part of the key is turning when you're in lift, not in sync. When you turn, especially when you first start turning, your turns aren't going to be super efficient. You are going to lose height. So you kind of want as much lift as possible for that turn to minimize that height loss. If you're turning in sync, you're going to get a lot of height loss, and you're kind of screwed at that point, and you're going to land. So you need to get a vario. You need to be attuned to it. You need to listen to it. You need to get an understanding of, the beeps and what's lift and what's not lift. And I said, and you need to get better at turning. It's not something you're going to get in 5 minutes. It's definitely the sort of thing that I would talk to someone on the hill about. I'd get someone to watch you flying, see what you're doing, and then we can correct points on it. Certainly watching other pilots is good, but try and watch somebody with the same type of wing as yours. There's no point, if you're flying a low MB, watching somebody on a like a ozone, on a Xeno or a competition wing, and trying to emulate. It's not going to happen. watch someone with a similar wing, watch how they're turning, see if they're staying up, and that will give you an idea of what to do and what to follow. But basics. The key to efficient turning is weight shift, and the thing to practice is basically weight shift with minimal break. You know, and if you've got the space to do it and you're away from the hill, just practice turns with weight shift only. And so you can actually get to feel how your wing responds. And I would definitely say that if you want to turn, you know, more efficient, faster turns definitely always come from weight shift first and then some break. If you're trying to break and then weight shift, it really doesn't work. You can't, you know, the mechanics of it, you do need to weight shift. And as basic as it is, it is also worth stressing what weight shift is. Sometimes I see people who just cross their legs and they think they're weight shifting. You haven't weight shifted anything. You know, if you think you're mostly, I'm assuming you're all flying with a seat board, not a hammock. So you have a seat board. Weight shift means that if that's your seat board, you are doing this with the seat board. That's a weight shift. If your seat board doesn't move, you haven't weight shifted, basically. So you're taking your risers, and by moving the seat board, you're doing this with the risers, or this with the risers. That's what you're actually doing. That will then turn the wing. You know, if you're just leaning, if you just lean and your seat board does this, you haven't weight shifted. You know, you've got to move that seat board. And if once you get that feeling, seat board, a little bit of break, you will find your turns become a lot smoother and a lot more efficient. So that's, I think, those two things, and that's something you can practice. If you really work on that, you'll find that you turn better, you turn smoother, you'll stay in the lift better. Other than that, fly, practice. It just takes hours of practice. I'm sorry, there's no real quick fix for it. Then working with your Vario, practice, and you'll get better.
I would add to that mental approach that if you approach with the state of mind that, oh, I'm going to bomb out and have to go and bottom land, then you probably will. If you approach it saying, right, my goal on this flight is to soar for 20 minutes, because my last soaring flight was 15 minutes, and follow the advice that John just gave to reach that goal. So with a determination that you will fly for 20 minutes and that you won't just bail out after 15, then you're more likely to do so. Yeah,
I would add to that as well, that for all your flying initially, don't just fly. Set a task for yourself. Set a doable task, because then you've got something you can assess. Like Robin says, you know, as long as you've flown is 15. Okay, see if you can fly for 20. And if realistically you could fly for 20, you didn't. Now you can look at, well, why not? What happened? Did I just give up? Did I not like the air? Did I not turn efficiently? What actually occurred? And by all means, when you land, find a coach and have a chat with them and say, look, what happened? Everyone else is like, I'm not, what occurred? And, you know, and learn something from it. But always work on correcting one thing at a time. Don't try and, like, you know, at the end of this talk, we've covered lots of things. Don't think, right, now I'm going to go practice 100 different things. You know, pick one thing you can work on initially and work on it. And when you've worked on that, pick the next thing you can work on. And that will give you your improvement. You know, it's tempting to want everything to happen now, but it's like, it's a gradient approach of push a little bit, work on it, push, work on it, push, work on it. You know, that's kind of how it goes. So we'll run to 9:30, Robin.
Yep. That gives us probably time for one more, maybe two. The next one I've got was, I think it was Demetrios. What alarm signs should I look for to indicate that it's time to land? Is that you, Demetrios?
Yep.
Did you have anything particular in mind, or just a general question?
Really on the extremes, I would presume. Anything that is like a complete sign that you should land as fast as possible.
Well, I can think of sort of three particular things, and perhaps John can expand on them. But
Yeah.
one's incoming rescue helicopter, another's rain, and the other is changing wind conditions.
Yeah.
How do you recognise them?
Incoming helicopter. So first of all, if you suddenly see a lot of other pilots landing, assume they're landing for a reason. That's the almost biggest indicator that there's something going on, where there's been an accident or something, is you'll suddenly see a lot of pilots coming into land. Who would, you think, well, you look around and think, well, the air's flyable. Why are people landing? Land and find out. That's the biggest sign I can think of for that, is tons of people suddenly landing. Let's deal more with the sort of thing which is probably slightly harder, where you are flying, other people are flying, and the conditions are changing, and you kind of got to make a decision: when do I land? Now, because now you're in a situation where there will always be a group of pilots that will push it to the limit. They'll stay to the point where they're landing like just before it rains, or just before the gust front comes through, or just before the sea breeze hits. So following other pilots in that case is not always a good idea. What this comes down to is continuous assessment of the conditions. That when you're flying, you cannot assume that because it was a 10-kilometer wind when I took off, it's now an hour later, it's still a 10-kilometer wind. And there is no, you have to continue to assess. One of the simplest ways of assessing wind strength is every now and then just fly directly into wind and check your ground speed, and just see, am I still penetrating with ease? Am I starting to slow down? And certainly if you get to the point where without speed bar, you're not going forward, land. Your speed bar is your only safety margin. If you're getting to the point where you've got to put speed bar on just to go forward, you're almost too late. You need to get on the ground before it gets too strong. Now, maybe the wind will drop, maybe it won't pick up, maybe it was the wrong decision, but if you're on the ground, you can assess it quite comfortably. You can't assess it quite so comfortably in the air going backwards. So it can get dangerous very fast. So basically, my answer is continuous assessment of the conditions. Again, there is flying is this continuous game of what's happening, what's going on. You'll get brief moments where you can, you're on a glide, you can relax a little bit, but you can't ever switch off entirely. It's one of those ones where what's happening with the clouds, what's happening with the wind, what's happening with the pilots, what's going on around me. Just watch what's happening, basically, rather than trying to cover every condition.
It's something that you will get experience from just being on the hill. You'll see the clouds starting to overdevelop, the cumulonimbus appearing, the thunderstorm incoming, and start to recognize, oh, last time it did that, it got very windy and then started to rain.
But yeah, so initially err on the side of caution. It's better to land too early and launch again than wait and land too late, basically. Yeah. So there is nothing wrong with landing early. There really isn't. Don't be concerned that you were the first pilot to land. Don't be concerned that this time it didn't work out and the wind was fine. You could have stayed up longer. Fine, you'll learn by experience. But you can always land and take off again. It's better to be comfortably on the ground with the option to take off than uncomfortably in the air with very few options to land. That's what I'd basically say on that. So it's
we've probably in that case, John, got time for one more. I think I had two more listed, but perhaps we can organise another one of these, and if there are other questions, we can add those to the agenda for the next time.
This was a general coverall. We can take up things in more detail, other coaching ones, and look at them more in depth. But sure.
Nicholas Loxton asked, what are the best ways to lose height before landing? We've already covered crabbing in and top landing, Nicholas. Were you just talking about what are the different options? Anything to add on your question?
Yeah, what I was concerned about was kind of what John was just talking about. You get to a point where actually you think it's time to land, but actually you're just not losing height. And obviously you can put the speed bar on and change your angle of attack and so on. But are there, and you can figure out, go backwards and forwards and gradually hope that you'll you'll get down. But if you get in a situation where you're coming in, you want to land, and you just don't seem to be losing height.
I would say until you've been on an SIV course, big ears and bar.
Right. Okay.
But don't do that too close to the ground.
Yeah. The other thing I would say on that is, if the wind's picking up, do not get fixated on the top landing.
Right.
The main problem people have with landing when the wind picks up is they want to land back on top. And now they're having trouble because obviously they come into land, the wind picks up, they hit the ridge lift, they can't get down, and they panic a bit.
And also remember what I said earlier about Venturi effect.
Yeah.
The wind picks up at 60 feet, and as you get to ground level, it's more than that.
Yeah. So step one is do not fixate on the top landing. While you've got a bit of forward motion, push out, get away from the hill, and just decide you're going to do a bottom landing and set yourself up for that.
Yeah.
If that's not straightforward, then your other option is, for most of our sites, we've got decent landing fields behind takeoff. You can cut and run, go back 400 or 500 meters behind the hill, fall out of the lift and land back there.
But equally, as well as there being bailout landing fields behind the hill, there are also places where you definitely shouldn't land. So make sure you're familiar with those.
Yeah.
Whether that be at Caburn or Devil's Dyke.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the key thing is, this is where it's, if you feel the wind is picking up, check your speed, check your head speed, check that you can still, that you still got your speed bar as a safety margin. Because now with your speed bar, you can push away from the hill and you can go to a bottom landing. And you will fall out of sync. You're not going to keep going up forever. It's like, it's not going to happen. You will, if you push forward, you will hit sync, you will come down, you will come out the lift band, and you can land at the bottom. And now you're not, as Robin says, you're not trying to land in Venturi. The wind may well still be strong at the bottom. If the wind's picked up, you may have to be prepared for a bit of a dragging. Make sure you've got plenty of space behind you.
That makes a lot of sense. Don't think that you've got to land on the top. Go somewhere else.
But that's the biggest problem people have. They fixate, I've got to land back on the top. I've got to land back on the top. And now they get in trouble.
That's a really, really good bit of advice.
Yeah. Don't worry about it.
I think that's pretty much brought us up to 9:30, John. There were a couple of topics we didn't deal with. One was traffic on the ground. Another, which actually was one that I threw in, which was when and how should I deploy my reserve?
I think
park those for another occasion.
Yeah, those are anything kind of SIV-ish. Well, basically, I'm concerned about information overload apart from anything else. Like you're giving people too much data. I think what we'd like to do, because we used to run coaching things once a month as regular as clockwork. So with Robin, I'd like to get those back in.
Yeah, I'm very keen for that as well.
Yeah.
And I don't know what the situation is with Blind Social Club, but we've become used to this world of Zoom, and I realise not everybody lives within close proximity of southern sites. But I think it would be good for, particularly given that we've had so many new red ribbons come through the system during lockdown and still trying to build up ours, to have some opportunity for physical meetings.
I'll speak to Dave from Blind and find out what the situation is. So if we can have one there, we will. So it's a nice little social gathering. I generally don't know the answer to that question, but regardless of that, we'll do the monthly ones. And rather than trying to cover 500 topics, we'll concentrate on. So we'll take an area and we'll go through it in detail. I mean, this really was a chance to you guys to sort of meet, get some data, and just to get you used to asking questions. I don't care how stupid, ridiculous, simple, basic you think your question is. It's always important. If you've got a question about flying, your attention's on it, get it answered. That really is my piece of advice. If you arrive on the hill and you want to get an answer to something, speak to someone, get it answered, then go flying. I mean, I really cannot stress enough that you are going to be flying on some of the busiest sites in Europe when you fly on our sites, and having your attention totally on flying is what you need to where it needs to be. So any questions you've got, please grab me, grab Robin, grab another coach, grab someone else on the hill, check they're a coach, ask your question, get it answered. I said, I will stress, no matter how trivial it might seem, it's not trivial. We're all going to be coming back into flying, not having flown for a good many weeks or months. You're going to be grabbing the risers incorrectly. You're not going to be sure if the lines are twisted or not twisted. You're going to have all sorts of questions. Get them answered. It's not a problem. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It's not an embarrassing thing to do. It's a safe thing to do, and it's a sensible thing to do. So feel free to ask, find out, practice a few things, do some ground handling, get your questions sorted out, and then look at flying. That I would just say preparation, get your questions out of the way. So anyway, thank you all for joining. It's we like doing these things. But it's great when we get feedback. It's great when you guys post things and say, oh, can we do this or can we do that? It then means we know we're presenting a topic that you're actually interested in rather than what we're interested in. So it's easy for us to do that. So please ask, please put questions on the Red Ribbon group, on the coaching forum. We will answer them. If you've got specific things you want talks on, let us know and we'll prepare. We'll put slides together, we'll put things together, we'll add some stuff to it. It's good for us as well. It makes us think about what we're doing. It keeps us on our toes.
Okay, thank you guys. It's been great.
Yeah. Cool.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, John, for organising hosting.
Yeah.
No, totally fine. I say it's great to do. And weather gods, sort it out, please. We want to go flying.
Yeah, nice, wouldn't it?
I will
Okay,
continue
guys.
to try and post when it's a flyable day for Red Ribbons.
Yeah, we'll see you on the hill and we'll help you out. Okay, thanks, Robin.
Thank you.
Thanks for
Thanks,
everything.
John. Bye.
Good, everyone.
Thank you very much, everybody. It was
Bye.
fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you all.